Hello, everyone. I just wanted to welcome you all to today's event, which is being organised by the Research Alliance for Disability Youth and Mental Health, called RAY, and the Melbourne Disability Institute. RAY is funded by the NHMRC, which is a participatory program of research looking at ways of closing the gap, a persistent gap in mental health between people with and without disabilities, a situation which, this is ringing, has got worse over the last couple of decades, particularly for young people with disabilities. And the Melbourne Disability Institute, which is an interdisciplinary institute at University of Melbourne, which conducts collaborative research, supports collaborative research, policy advocacy, and looking to make a real impact on the everyday lives of people with disability. I'm Professor Anne Kavanagh, and my pronouns are she, her, from the Melbourne School of Population Global Health and the director of the RAY program. Before I start, I just would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in which we are coming to you from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples joining us today. I acknowledge that this is and was and always will be Aboriginal land that was never ceded. I'm really excited to be here to introduce my friend and colleague and renowned disability scholar, activist, social scientist and bioethicist, Professor Tom Shakespeare, who most of you will know if you haven't met him, but at least by name and his wonderful works. We're also fortunate to have with us on the screen Gibbs, who's the CEO of the Disability Advocacy Network of Australia, and I'll introduce all of them a bit more when they come to speak, and Dylan McBurney, a transgender and disability advocate who is also here to speak this afternoon. Before we launch into the discussion about pain and neglected disability rights issues, I just want to run through a few what they call housekeeping. I think we need another word, but anyway. We're recording the session today, so we'll be able to watch it and reference it in the future and share it with others. We won't be using flash photography, and I ask that people don't use any photography in this session. We have professional live captioning by the Captioning Studio, and you can access the captionings by turning on captions at the bottom of your Zoom or by using the link in the chat. And we have a QR code in the room if you'd like to follow the captions on a personal device. We have a lot of people in the room, but we have more people online, and just wanted to welcome you all as well, and to make sure that we all can sort of participate in questions. And I would like that we're using Slido. You all been sent a link to Slido in your event reminder email, and we also have a QR code around the room so you can link into that chat. So you don't have to wait to ask your questions, just put them in the chat. And I have written by me, I've discovered by Sarah that if you're anything like me, she said, you might forget them if you don't put them in straight away. I thought it was Alex, but someone does know me very well. And we'll keep an eye on them and try and answer as many as we can in the time we have available at the end. Obviously, we won't necessarily get through all of them. So we're going to have a few moments. In a few moments, we're going to talk. Tom Shakespeare is going to speak to us, and then I'm going to invite Ellen and Dylan. Invite Dylan up here and Ellen, and talk to Elle on screen and ask them a few questions. So that's how it's going to run. At the end, we should have about 15 minutes for questions. So, as I mentioned, Professor Tom Shakespeare from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, a medical sociologist, interested in disability studies and the ethics of genetics. He's been involved with disabled people's movement in the UK and internationally. He's also active in arts and culture, was a member of the Arts Council of England. He was at WHO and involved in writing the World Report on Disability. He's also published a number of books, Disability Rights and Wrongs, that which is kind of a key text in this area, and Sexual Politics of Disability. But he's also a man of many other talents. He's just published his first novel, Ha Ha, and he's got another one coming out later this year. So encourage you to read those as well, which strangely actually have people with disabilities in them. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much. And thank you I'm Tom Shakespeare. My pronouns are he, him, and I acknowledge traditional owners of the land. It's a huge pleasure and a privilege to be here. I was first in Melbourne in 2002, so I know Melbourne. I've been married to Elise, so I'm Victorian as far as I remember, and it's a great place to come. People have been so kind and so welcoming, both online and in person, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm here to talk about what I want to call the social life of pain. And you may say to me, if this is new, why pain? Why do you want to talk about pain? Well, pain is very common. It's very common in the community. Everybody has pain. A small boy came to see me yesterday and tried my wheelchair. And luckily, his father saved him because he went upside down and his head was like literally millimeters away from hitting the concrete. And I knew how that felt because I'd done that. And it hurts a lot. And he luckily was saved by his dad, but I wasn't. Unfortunately, he was not there. And I just went, well, I'm not going to say what I said, but it was rude. I went over backwards. So all of us have pain. We have pain when we go over in our wheelchairs. We have pain when our guts hurt or when our impairments cause us pain. We have pain once a month. We have pain from endometriosis. We have pain from all sorts of things. To be alive is to have pain. But obviously, and it's so important, pain is, in many surveys, the most commonly reported symptom of disability. So it is everywhere. We all experience it at some time, and some of us experience it every day. So why don't we talk about it more? Why don't we research it more? Why don't we ask questions about it? And one of the reasons in disability studies is because often we don't talk about the single most important thing, I think, which is that we have bodies. And our bodies give us great pleasure. That may be food, or it may be sex, or it may be a blissful feeling, it may be drugs, it may be a blissful feeling. But our bodies also hurt. They hurt when we give birth, they hurt in menstruation, they hurt in aging. They hurt in many impairments all the time. So it's not actually foreign to us, it is central to us. And some people have pain all the time. They have chronic pain. So their pain is not something that comes when they turn a wheelchair over or when they have a period of pain or when they have birth or whatever. It is almost every day, sometimes every day. And there are so many people who have arthritis, who have fibromyalgia, who have endometriosis, who have spinal cord injury, who have joint pain, lots and lots of things that affect us. Now, disability studies has been good at dealing with, as it were, the cultural, political, even the economic dimension of being a disabled person. And we have, disabled people and our allies have said, you must include our experience. You must make reasonable accommodation. You must give access to us, regardless of our communication modality, regardless of whether we use wheelchairs or not, regardless of where we are or not. Because a proper social world includes disabled people. We are so common. 15% of the world's population, when we wrote the World Report on Disability, have disability. But I want to say that I think that one of the problems of disability is that we include the public life of disability. We don't always include the private life of disability. So what I mean by the public life is things like voting, things like employment, things like jobs and schools and those public things. But what about the private things? What about pain? But also, what about sexuality, or what about any dimension of our public life? Because if you think to yourself, what is the most important thing to you? Yeah, your job's important, your qualifications are important. But more than that, your friends are important, your partner is important, your child is important. Your body is important. Because that's how you experience the world. And those are the people you experience the world with, and they are the most important things in the world to you. So we need to include that in disability studies. And the reason that was not included at the start was because the founders of the disability movement and the founders of disability studies felt that that private world was the only way the disabled people were seen. The disabled people were seen as tragic victims of their bodies all the time. So of course they didn't want to talk about those personal, private things. They wanted to talk about public things. But I think we are now at a stage, because what I'm talking about really happened in the 1970s and the 1980s. We are now at a stage when, thank goodness, we can talk about those things. We can talk about what's most important to us. And that might be getting a job, that's fine. Or it might be seeing ourselves on television or in books, that's fine. Or it might be the daily life we lead, the social life of pain. For some of us, that is very, very important. So if we're going to talk to disabled people, if we're going to capture their variety and their experiences, we need to capture this experience. Not because it defines us, no, but because it is part of us. It is something we live with. Now, pain is the most private thing. So Wittgenstein, the philosopher Wittgenstein, his famous private language argument was, how can you express the pain you have to somebody else? How do you know that they're experiencing what you're experiencing? How can you communicate that? And people have tried to communicate pain through the McGill pain questionnaire, through all sorts of methods, devices, really, so that we can talk about our pain, because it is very difficult. But I think that because it's so common, and because some people live with chronic pain, the people I've mentioned, and many, many others, then it is part of our world, and it is a social thing. There's nothing more private, but it is also a social thing. Because if we try to participate in the world with pain, or with fatigue, or with those other bodily features, they are part of us. And we cannot just ignore them. They are often, maybe always, with us. So they are social. They have cultural meaning. Now, Anne was kind enough to refer to my book. If you read books or you see television or films, and I was on a plane coming over, so I saw films, what do people almost never do in films and books? And what do we do every day? Many times, maybe more than once. We go to the toilet. And books and films and TV almost never deals with that. Almost never. Yet it is part of our lives. We know it's part of our lives. We don't talk about it, but it is. and so is pain. It is part of our lives. It is something which we are, well, maybe somebody talked about the invisible body. So the body is made visible when it is in pain. So we might ignore bits of our body because they don't matter, but then they hurt and they matter. So you're not aware of your mouth until you have an ulcer or a sore tooth. You're not aware of I'm never aware of my feet. I'm so not aware of my feet, people, that I came home and I wasn't drunk. I came home with only one of my shoes because the other shoe had been knocked off and I didn't know where. I emailed the bus company and said, have you found my shoe? I emailed the theatre and said, by the way, lost property, did you find my shoe? I told all my people in my flats, look outside when you go to the bus in case you see my shoe. I never found my shoe. So there is a left shoe somewhere in Kennington or Lambeth or somewhere in London, which belongs to me. And I want it back because these shoes, all shoes are expensive. These shoes are expensive. I had to get a new effing pair of shoes because I could not go out with one shoe. So I have one shoe and I would like the other. But the point I'm telling you is that you don't notice your bits until they have pain, until they give you trouble. Maybe you sometimes notice your bits, but the whole thing about drinking drugs or sex or whatever, the pleasures, is your body dissolves, it melts away. You just want, hopefully, it's great tummy afterwards. You're one pleasure center. You don't feel much, but you do feel pain. You do feel the bits that in your mouth or wherever that don't really feel good. So if it is part of our life, we need to talk about it. And that's where I think the disability research, the disability studies people in the past, in the 70s and 80s and so forth, the 90s, got it wrong. And they, in a way, did what feminists criticize. They divided life into the public and the private. And they said, we'll talk about the public, we'll campaign on the public, we'll make the public central to our disability movement, but we'll not talk about the private. And yet, the private is part of us, obviously, but the private also influences us in all sorts of ways. It is part of us. And if we don't include it, we're not including all of us, all of ourselves. And I don't mean literally every one of us, but part of all of us. We're only including part of you. But I'm not interested in what they were criticizing back in the 70s, the misery story of how awful it is to have X, Y, and Z. I'm interested in how we survive, how we work, how we learn, how we love, how we parent, how we go about the world despite this. Because we do, we have to. You're either defeated by it and you are ground down by it, like with oppression, like with public, but the private, either the pain defeats you or not. And I'm interested in the or not. So we know what reasonable accommodation is. We know that, for example, you've got to have a ramp, it's got to be to grade. I wouldn't have put a ramp which is not to grade, I don't care. But it was not quite the right gradient. We know we have sign language interpretation for deaf people. Yet we do, we know we have toilets somewhere in this building for men, women, and for people who need more space. But we don't know what reasonable accommodation is for people in pain. It might be a comfortable bed. It might be a new mattress. It might be WFB. So you know about WFH, working from home. I'm a pioneer of WFB, which means working from bed. But I'm not the only person who does this. Many of the people on Zoom, many people in this room work from bed. They hurt because they're pain. Going out is a hassle. It will cause some pain. And I want to record this. I want us to record this. I want to know what they need. I want to know maybe they need to start later, or because they often are on drugs. I don't mean street drugs, I mean prescribed drugs. They're on painkillers. So they might be forgetful, or they might be dozing in the morning, or whatever. I want to know what that's like. I want to know how they live, learn, work, parent, partner, everything else that's important to them. Because they do. All of them do. Some of, so I want to record these stories. I want to learn. I want to know what it might be like and how they might be more included. Now, many of you on Zoom are either very busy or you have pain and you're at home or whatever. You're very welcome. It's very interesting. I was, before I came away, at a meeting of people who want to make the Barbellion Prize continue and be successful. What is the Barbellion Prize, you're asking yourself? It's for people where people have disabilities and chronic illness, many of whom have some form of pain, maybe muscle pain, gut. And because of that pain, they commit to writing their essays or their books or their novels or their poems. And they share them. I meet my agent about once every couple of years, but we have communication much more often than that because we can, because we have email, because we have phones, because of Zoom, and we keep in contact. And therefore, I can, through my writing, try and share some experiences with the world. And it doesn't matter whether I have pain. It doesn't matter that I wrote the book that Anne was kind enough to mention, the second book, mainly from bed, which I did. It's coming out in May, as she says. It's called The Ends. Okay. But we can do a whole lot of things through Zoom, through communication, through online, through broadcast. So when I had a spinal cord injury, it was 2008. So it was after I first came here, obviously. And the Radio 3 were broadcasting a series of thoughts by people and kind enough to ask me. So I went from my hospital in Middlesbrough. I don't know if you've ever been to England, but Middlesbrough is not somewhere you want to go. I think that's fair enough, isn't it? I was there for 8 effing weeks being rehabilitated. And I was really glad that despite being in a rehabilitation centre, my contact with BBC wanted to hear what I had to say. He wanted me to record a forethought. So I turned up at this this recording studio in Middlesbrough BBC. I recorded my thought, which is about Gregor Mendel, who was a great geneticist. He was a monk. And in a way, a monastery is a bit like a rehabilitation center. You're away from the world, but you're thinking about the world. So that Gregor Mendel, and he was making his plant experiments with peas, trying to work out the laws of inheritance. And here I was in a rehabilitation center, shut off from the world, trying to work out pee, pain, skin, wheelchairs, a different modality for being in the world. Because I had entered well, I hadn't entered, I had been for the first 40-something years mobile, and now 2008 I became immobile with an incomplete quarter-quadra injury. And because it's incomplete, that's why I have pain. And all my career, I've written about things which were of relevance to me and interest me. So Anne was kind enough to mention the first book with a group of people we wrote called The Sexual Politics of Disability. Came out in 1996. I was 33. No, I wasn't. I was 30. Can't even remember I was born. I was 30. And because people in their 20s and that time are, sorry, I'm feeling back, should I be back there? Because people in that era of their lives are, yeah, they're having partnerships, they're having sex, let's put it that way. That was of interest to me. Later on, I had children, and therefore, with a colleague, we did work about childhood. And later on, when my body was beginning to cause some problems, I did a whole project about having skeletal dysplasia, having restricted growth, short stature. And then, but now I have pain since 2008. Sorry, it's a little bit of vibration. I don't know why. Sorry about that. Is that that? Am I pressing down? You rescue me and everybody else. Is it slid down?
Against that.
Ah, that's why. That's why you. Sorry about that. Sorry about friends online. If that's better. I'm not going to move. I'm there. I'm not going to breathe. You might. It's a great performance piece. You might see me expire before your very eyes. Hopefully, it will not. Anyway, I did forethought in 2008. I write about things that are relevant to me. And in writing about pain, I want to reclaim it. I want us to say it is part of human existence and it can be accommodated. The fact is that at the moment I do global development work. Why do I do global development work? Because I worked at WHO and I realized that most of the world's millions and millions, billion disabled people live in developing countries. And it's all very well you folk in Australia or us folk in the United Kingdom talking about our new wheelchairs or our new prosthetics, orthotics, whatever, but most people do not have them. I've got a wheelchair which is insured for over £3,000. I'm not sure, not this one, this is rubbish. This is not insured still. But my other wheelchair is insured for about £3,000. Most people in the world do not have the wheelchairs they need. Only 15% of people in the world have the wheelchairs they need. And they live in many, many parts of the world where a public health system is not available. And where pain medication is not available. So if you work at WHO, where the WHO got pain? They got pain down because people have the right to analgesia. People have the right to relief from their pain. And we know that in America, there's a huge epidemic of opiate addiction. So clearly that's what people are frightened of. But they solve the problem of drugs by not having it. That is not a solution for people who have children or people who have periods or people who have endometriosis or people who have fibromyalgia or people who have arthritis or people who have spinal cord injury or people who have lots of other conditions which cause pain. So when I work with WHO or I work with my team in London, looking at the world's billion disabled people, I have to think to myself, you can have your pregabalin or you can have your amitriptyline or whatever it might be, but most people do not have that. There is a human right, which is relief from pain. We talk about the human right to vote, we talk about the human right to education, employment, and to living independently, whatever it might be. I'm not moved. People, the human right to pain relief is really important. And because childbirth, because menstruation, because we need to capture that. But in a way, do you think I should move that? I think the pocket is a problem. No? Is that better? I'll just hold it. I want us in our research to talk to people who have pain, to talk to people about their lives, to talk to people about their hacks. We talk about the hacks that we have for getting about, where to park, where to get the best coffee, but also the hacks about remembering things because we forget things, or the hacks about starting late. My colleague pointed out that you didn't miss meetings if you use your phone to alarm and set an alarm quarter of an hour before your meeting. It's great. I never knew that. It's absolutely fantastic for people who are a bit not necessarily punctual at meetings. And in the same way that we have these hacks for people with all sorts of impairments, attention deficit or other conditions, just as we have hacks for people with autism, people with other forms of neurodivergence. Just as we have hacks for people with spinal cord injury. And so this is a great wheelchair, you must admit. And people who are in wheelchairs look at each other's wheelchairs. It's really quite disgusting. So you might look at each other's boobs or pelvis or whatever, but people in wheelchairs do that too. But they also look at each other's wheelchairs. Oh, nice, like that. And you may think, and it is true, that my wheelchair is rubbish. I was once there's a, you have a lift, you have an ambi-lift to an airport. And I was in the ambi-lift with another wheelchair user, and I looked at the wheelchair, and I swear to you, it's the worst wheelchair you've ever seen. It was really, really rubbish, much worse than mine. It was, I looked at it, I said, sorry, I don't want to be rude, but your wheelchair is a piece of shit. And he said, I know, this isn't my wheelchair. I'm going to my other home, where I have a nice wheelchair there, and I have a nice wheelchair in Scotland. But for travel, I have this rubbish wheelchair. And because it is made rubbish by travel, by airlines. But so he knew that if he wanted to look smart, he needed a smart wheelchair, and he needed to have one where he went and one where he came from. But in the course of the transition, the wheelchair would be damaged. And our bodies are clearly very like that. They fall apart. They have bits replaced. I'm not going to ask you to put up your hands if you have a hip replacement, but I bet there are lots of people in this room who have hip replacements or want to have hip replacements. I would like to ask you to put your hands up if you use regularly painkillers. I'm sure lots of you, all of you, will put your you put your hands up. Because it is so ubiquitous. And maybe because it's so ubiquitous, we do not talk about it. But I think we should. I think we should ask people about it. It was very interesting. There was a project called the Sparkle Project, which is about children with cerebral palsy. And what was they looked at loads of children across Europe. I think they had thousands of children with cerebral palsy in the Sparkle Project. And they found that the quality of life of these disabled children was the same or better than non-disabled children. It's a really important project, except for one dimension. And that dimension was pain. And so they were equal to everybody else if they didn't have pain. If they had pain, their quality of life really went down. So it was really important to them. It should be really important to us, whether or not we have cerebral palsy, to bring people up to what everybody else has, or to if we cannot bring them up, to make sure that their pain is not a reason that they are seen as second-class citizens or silenced or excluded from the debate that we have, the research we do, the schools we run, the universities we're part of, the jobs we do. In a way, nothing I have to say is novel. You know all this. And it's the same as what we used to say in the 70s about disability. Why should we have a world with no disabled people in it? Why should we segregate disabled people? And what I'm saying about people with pain, most of whom are disabled or be seen to be disabled, is the same. How can we have a policy, a world in which people with pain are not represented? Thank you.
timing. I'll just have to switch this on again. Because it's coming on. We're now turning to talk to Elle. Is she on the screen? Hi, Elle. I can't look at you because otherwise I'm not looking at everyone else. So I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm just going to introduce Elle first. Elle Gibbs is will be known to many people, but she's a person with a disability with over 15 years experience in policy, strategy and advocacy for the rights of people with disabilities. She's a sought-after consultant in policy. I call her Australia's disability policy wonk, I think might be the way we talk about her. I don't know whether she's smiling. I hope she's not putting her thumbs down or something. Communications and strategy, and held various senior roles in national disability representative organisations. She's actually just started as the Chief Executive Officer of Disability Advocacy Network Australia, which is a really important position, and we're all absolutely thrilled that she's doing that. She's an award-winning writer, publishes around the NDIS, around disability issues, and she lives in regional New South Wales. She's done so many things. I don't really quite know how many things to say here, but she's worked on diverse projects around intellectual disability with service providers and philanthropic organisations. But she really is, if you not following Elle on any social media or anything, you need to follow her because she has her finger on the pulse of pretty much everything. So thanks, Elle, for joining us today. It does feel really weird speaking to you, looking at everyone else, but anyway. So I've got a few questions for you. Can you tell us a bit about your own experiences of pain and how it might have impacted your life?
Of course. Thanks so much, Anne. And I can see you fine. So before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm coming from unceded and sovereign Wiradjuri country here in Central West New South Wales. My pronouns are she, her. And yes, as Anne said, I'm soon to be the CEO of Dana, still the Deputy CEO for another 2 weeks or so. Huge thanks to Anne and to Ray for having me, and to Professor Tom. What a fantastic conversation that you've kicked off here, and I'm really delighted to be here to have this conversation. It's one of very dear to my heart for reasons that will become obvious in a moment. So look, I've been disabled in different ways most of my life, but I became sick with the autoimmune disease that mostly disables me when I was 19, and I'm in my mid-50s now, so it's quite a long time now. And pain has been part of that the whole way along. So pain through a dysfunction of the skin where I'm covered in basically burns, things that feel equivalent to that, all over me, and spent a long time, lots of time in hospital for different periods of time. So most of my 20s and 30s was spent long stretches in hospital, doing the working from bed, did a lot of my university in that kind of environment. And I was diagnosed with arthritis when I was 22. So pain and how that becomes part of the disability experience was part of my life, where I engaged with the disability system far before I ever thought about myself as a disabled person. So I didn't come to think about myself as a disabled person because disabled people are not kind of feeling sorry for themselves in hospital like I was. They're, climbing mountains and doing Paralympians and stuff like that. So I didn't really understand that that was me, even though I got disability support, was on the DSP, all of that kind of stuff. But when I started reading feminist disabled scholars such as Susan Wendell, starting to think about ideas about pain and fatigue and impairment and the social model, it really did, as I've often said, like a light bulb or an explosion going off in my brain, where disability became more than my personal experience. It became a part of a movement and a structure that was incredibly important. But I've always sought out the experiences of pain and fatigue, because that's another part of my disability, as part of how we have these conversations. And I I've certainly, as you were talking, Professor, I got a bunch of the books that I've really enjoyed and thought about. Sonia Huber's book about Pain Woman Takes Your Keys and other essays, and Joanna Hedver's work about sick woman theory, and Alison Kafer's feminist queer crip book, because those are the kind of books that have really kind of grappled with impairment, disability, and how we make those kind of adjustments. So these days, I'm actually in much more pain than I've ever been in my life. I take a large amount of drugs. I like that you talked about drugs. They are a very big part of my life. And I am much more disabled in a more conventional sense than I was when I was younger. So I now virtually can't travel. It's very difficult for me to travel. And I, yes, have the addition of significant nerve pain, all of those kind of fun expressions of a lifetime with arthritis. So I think that as pain changes, I think there's also that thing of as we get older and our bodies change, that there are things for disabled people about pain that is helpful for us to think and talk about. And as I often talk to the myriad of health professionals ridiculously involved in my life, is it middle age? Is it something else? How do we manage the competing demands of all of that? So yeah, so my life is restricted a little bit by pain, but also I think informs a lot of the things that I think about in terms of disability and the changes that we can make.
So just the next question, Elle, is more about what you'd like other people to know, both people that you have contact, with in day-to-day life, your friends, your family, community, colleagues, to know about what it's like living with pain, and what kind of things would you like policymakers to understand so they can make better policy decisions?
Oh, I think it's a great question, Anne, but also one I'm not super comfortable with, because I don't like talking about it very much, and I don't talk about it much. So as most of you know, I talk about disability all the time. I don't talk about my own disability very often. But pain occupies a good half of my brain at any point in time. So at any point that anyone is talking to me, I'm in pain. So, and I'm thinking about it, there's parts of my body that are distracting, all of that. I go to bed at the end of the day of my work day. So that's what I do. So at the end of it, I close my work computer, I go to bed. And then when I get up again, I sit here and I do my work. But it is isolating. It can make for a very, very different life than other people. And acknowledging the hardships of that, I think, is also really important. When I was younger, I often thought that if I talked about that it was really hard, no one would want to talk to me, or that I had to somehow rise above. I mean, what a ridiculous idea, but pain is part of life, and this is how my life is now. So I think that's how it is. But in terms of our systems and structures, which I go moving right along to something I'm much more comfortable talking about, both our disability and health systems are, to use the technical term, really crap on dealing with pain. And our disability system, in terms of individualised supports, specifically excludes pain as one of the impairments or part of the impairments that you can get support for. They try and have this very strange artificial separation between health and disability in what kinds of supports that are available through our NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. But what that fails to take into account is that the health system is also crap on pain, and it is expensive. It relies very much on living in the city. It relies on access to specialists, which are expensive. It relies on access to allied health, which is expensive. All of those things that for the majority of people with disability who rely on, who are in pain, who rely on income support or small amounts of employment, making it completely out of reach. So there was a decision that was made around some of this and access to the NDIS that is controversial, but I think is a good one. because the decision through our courts was that because our health system is so inaccessible for people who need this specialist support, that the NDIS can't wash their hands of us. So I think it's something that we have to think and talk about much more in terms of how we support people who are really doing it tough. One of the key groups that has the worst rates of access to the NDIS, about 20%, are older women with autoimmune related illnesses, and particularly are trying to survive, not even on the disability support pension, which Professor is a little bit higher than our job seeker amount, but they are on the job seeker allowance, which is so far below the poverty line that people cannot even find housing, let alone eat. So this group of people are doing it so tough, and yet all of our systems go, no help for you. So we're working really hard to try and fix some of this as part of changes to the NDIS, but governments of all flavours, including the many that I go and talk to, are very resistant to it. And it makes it very hard knowing how many people are really suffering because of that.
Thank you, Elle. I might, we'll stay on there because we're going to ask you some questions from the audience later. But Dylan, if you'd like to come up, really excited to introduce Dylan McBurney, who's a young transgender and disabled advocate with experience across lots of sectors, working with children and young people with disabilities Australia, sharing their experience with young people across the country, and also having worked extensively in youth, trans and gender diverse health. And they were nominated for the Mentee of the Year at Australian Disability Network Disability Conference Awards in 2024. So my first question to you, Dylan, is can you tell us a bit about the impact on pain on your life as a young person?
Yeah, it's so interesting having pain as a young person because it feels like there's this unspoken rule, and I don't know what the age is, but there is an age where you're allowed to have pain. If you're younger than that, you're not allowed. I don't know what you're talking about, but you're not actually in pain, you know. And it's so interesting, and you know, pain has had such an impact on my life. I kind of consciously first remember my chronic pain starting when I was 14 years old. By the time I was in the upper years of high school, you know, I had to have an 85% attendance rate to pass my year in year 11, and you know, probably 4 days of every month I was in the sick bay, which was covered in Geelong Cats posters for some reason, with really severe pain from what I now know to be endometriosis. It took me 5 years from that point to be diagnosed, but you know, that already puts me so far behind everyone else. And then losing more days to other types of chronic pain that I have. By the middle of the year, they told me, well, you don't have a doctor's certificate for any of this. You don't have diagnosis. If you came into school every single day for the rest of the year, you would not pass. And it felt like such a waste of my time, and I did end up leaving school, and there were so many opportunities after that I'm really thankful for. But at the time, you know, I was like, why aren't I trying hard enough? Why don't I care enough? What is it about me that I'm not dedicating myself to school the way that I should be? It's really isolating.
Yeah, incredible, you know, story, and a really impactful and huge impact on your life. Today, you know, Tom and Ellen that have talked a bit around the different models of disability and how you might think of them in terms of pain. What are your reflections on those concepts?
Yeah, I find it really interesting because when I kind of tried a lot of things out after high school, studying different things. And when, you know, the disability support pension was not there for me as someone with fibromyalgia, someone with endometriosis, and the NDIS was not there for me, the disability sector was there for me and offered me employment and really gave me the accommodations that I needed and the understanding I needed, which was really life-changing. But as a young person going into the disability space where, you know, you're at an organization or you're in a community that supports and endorses the social model, it feels like there's something not quite right of like, okay, I'm trying to identify the barriers that get in the way of me participating in society and I can't find them. You know, like my pain and my disability is a barrier, but like Elle said, it's a really hard thing to talk about because it is personal, and also because, and I kind of was introduced to this topic by Jenny Morris, an academic, and she wrote about, you know, it feels like when you talk about those negative parts of disability, you're playing into the hands of the people that believe the opposite of you, that believe that you don't deserve to be there and live a fulfilled life and make choices about your life. And that's really tough. And I think it's exciting that we are moving into another phase of disability advocacy where those conversations can start to be had. But as a young person, you know, the people around you all endorsing this social model, you're like, yes, this is what it is to be a disability advocate, what it is to be disabled. Like, and I was really keen for my organization to kind of promote the social and human rights models of disability together, especially for young people who are coming into their identity. Disability pride is a big thing. I think like feeling represented by those models of disability from an organization that you work with that supports you is really important. And so I held a consultation with a group of young people, and all of the responses were the same, where I always didn't quite feel that I fit in, and I didn't have the words to say why that was, why the social model didn't fit. So that was really powerful. I think that something like a human rights model of disability like can really empower people. I think my generation of disabled people, especially like disability pride is this really huge thing that I think is gaining more visibility online and on social media, that sort of thing where people can find their really niche communities. My brain lost its train of thought.
No, you've done it. Amazing. So the last question I have from you is some of your perspectives on pain and pain management. What would you like to see change, and what has made the biggest difference to you?
I'm going to finish my last thought because my brain's back where it was, talking about disability pride. I think that when you have something like chronic pain that does negatively impact your life so much, like disability pride is something that you can hold on to. And I had a great experience I was working with another young person on a show I was working on. I work in the theatre, and I said, I saw in the program you said you have a disability. What's your disability? Because I ask questions like that. It's not always appropriate, but I was like, I'm disabled. What's your disability? And he said, fibromyalgia. You've probably not heard of it. And I was like, that's amazing. Yeah. And it's like, never would anyone else in your life have that reaction to telling you about their diagnosis, right? But it's those moments of connection and joy that I think are so important, especially for young people. And yeah, so talking about like what I want people to know about pain is I want people to know that I'm really proud of my identity and I'm proud of the work that I do despite my pain, but that I am in pain. And, you know, when I'm up in the morning making breakfast, I'm in pain. When I'm at work, I'm in pain. When I'm commuting, you know, all the time. And it doesn't mean that I'm, you know, and I achieve a lot of things that I'm really proud of, but it's tough. And you know, I find like when I'm working, like I'll work through a 5 out of 10 on the pain scale, a 6 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. When I'm at an 8 and have to step away, I feel really guilty about that. I think I should be able to work through this. But really, a lot of the time I'm working twice as hard as other people need to get ahead. And, you know, if I buy a new pair of shoes, they give me foot pain, I have to go to the physio, that's a week of my salary gone. You know, if I have a complication with my health, I have to get checked out, I need to get blood tests, I need to go to my GP, it's a week of salary gone. Like it puts you really far behind, and that's someone like me who's actually able to work. And like Elle said, I mean, it really is. I finish work for the day, I go to bed, and those private things, it's social life, relationships, you know, they're low in priorities. But yeah, just don't judge a book by its cover. As a young person with an invisible disability, it's really tough, and just I think that it's so interesting when you get leeway, when you say, I have a chronic pain disorder, I have a back problem, I find sometimes me saying I've got a back problem, people take that a lot better than I have chronic pain. Just understanding that people don't need to tell you that for you to give them some leeway, give them some room. Yeah.
I'm going to hand over to Helen, I think, who's got the questions for you folk.
Unsurprisingly,
I should introduce Helen Dickinson, Professor Helen Dickinson from University. You can introduce yourself.
done it for me. University of New South Wales in Canberra, and part of the Ray project. So there's a bunch of questions in here. We're not going to get through all of them. I've tried to bunch some together, so hopefully we can get through a few. And actually, a call for, maybe you can help us, Alex, with this. People in the chat saying there was lots of really good books talked about in there. What were great resources? Are there some? We send something around with references later, so maybe we can do that. But first couple of questions. Is there any research or advice on managing and identifying pain for non-verbal people with disability? Examples of how we can support people with invisible disabilities to advocate in the workplace? Guess I'll throw it open to the panel broadly.
So the question is about support for non-verbal people. I'm not an expert in that, so I can't really talk about that. But I think it's really one of the things that Dylan said that really chimed with me, and which I did not say, and I'm sorry, is that pain is about power. So women feel more pain than men. Folk from different minority ethnic communities in white majority countries feel more pain than the majority population. And I think children, their pain is made invisible. So they didn't used to be anesthetized. It was felt they didn't feel pain. And therefore you don't need to anesthetize them when you're doing a procedure. Because only, as you said, Dylan, only adults feel pain. So therefore you don't have to worry about that. And these pains that women feel, or that folk from different ethnic communities feel, or that children feel, have been ignored. And in the same way, I think the pain experience for people who cannot say ow, or people who may react in different ways to pain, are not properly understood or respected. And therefore, learning how, and it may be very individual, people express pain, who can't express pain, is really important. I'm sure there are books, I don't know any books, but I think it's really, really important. Dylan mentioned, I think, Jenny Morris's book, and I imagine you mean Pride Against Prejudice. I don't know what you mean, which one of them.
I think it was an article.
Okay. And so I've written two, fan letters before in my life. One was to Mr. Morpin, who wrote Maybe the Moon, which maybe you've read. It's very good capturing of life as as people with short stature. But also to Jenny Morris, because she wrote this book, Pride Against Prejudice, 1991. And that's really helpful on the way that our bodies, our pain, all the other aspects of, now we talk about spoons or whatever, our bodies influence us. They are part of us. And she said it first, and so I wrote her a thank you, and I wrote her a fan letter, which is the second one I ever wrote. Anyway, so I do think that is very important. Obviously, when Al Gibbs was talking about Pain Woman Has Your Keys, Takes the Keys, by Huber, Huber, H-U-B-E-R, that's a really good book, because the sort of, I'm going to use the wrong word, attention, phenomenology of pain. And phenomenology is how you experience the world. And pain is really important to how you experience the world. And I couldn't begin to write as well as she does about the pain that she experiences. And my copy of that book is so underlined and so page dog-eared, because she keeps on saying how it is in ways that I go, yeah, that's me. So I think that is a very good book. But then there are probably many others which are helpful.
There's another question here, and I don't know, Elle, if maybe you want to start on the answer to this one. There's a few people asking about, are there any resources or tips you have in advocating to employers if you're a worker who experiences pain?
Oh, again, one of my favourite topics, and my cat is about to join us. So if you do see a tail coming across, you know that where that's come from. So one of the things that we do at Dana is we take a no disclosure policy. So everybody in our organisation gets reasonable adjustments because everybody gets what they need to do their job. So we have a fully remote workplace. And while we do have some understanding of work from bed, we try and discourage it for the sole reason that, as you said, Dylan, we don't take enough time off. We don't have enough time where we go, I'm actually really unwell. I actually need to have a day of rest. So we really try and encourage people to rest, to not work overtime, which I know is unusual in the disability advocacy space. But to really push back on a kind of ableist work structure that assumes bodies are free of pain, fatigue, and responsibilities outside of work. And I don't want to be binary about it, but it is very gendered, this construction of work in particular ways that suits so few people, and certainly very few in the disability world. So we have people with a variety of disability, including pain, a variety of care needs and supports. And so we've taken a management decision that this is how we're going to do it. And we don't require, I've had people ask me, like, what do you need? Medical stuff? I'm like, I don't care. I don't want to know. I don't care why people need the adjustments. We just get it done. And so it's something that I'm increasingly talking about quite a lot, about how we do things. We did a strategic planning session with our board last week in Adelaide, and I did it remotely. So, and you know, it's one of those things where we're trying to upend how traditionally this has been done, because this is what we should do as disabled leaders. So part of, if I can't practice this in an organisation that I'm leading, what am I doing? You know, but also trying to talk about it a bit more publicly about how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and what are the mechanisms that we're putting in place, you know, sharing forms, sharing, you know, some of the practicalities with other disability representative organisations and other non-disability organisations. So my sympathy and empathy is with everyone who is not in that situation, but I'm really happy to talk with your bosses to spread how we're doing it, to really be, I am quite passionate about this being not only possible, but it is part of how we are doing so well. That disability leadership isn't something that you do and apologise for or do despite of. It's how we succeed. And I don't mean it in a capitalist kind of way, for God's sake, no. But I mean it in a, we succeed in doing our advocacy really well when it is embedded in the disabled experience. And we mean it at, you know, at every step of the organisation. We do not always get this right. And part of it is also being reflexive and being open to feedback when we're not doing it right, and we, you know, have another go and change it again. So, you know, we have deaf and hard of hearing folks in our organisation. We have a significant amount of neurodivergent folks, myself included, in the organisation. So we have to be flexible to make it work, and it really does.
Thanks, Elle. And Dylan, before you were talking about, you know, having previously not talked about pain necessarily because you didn't want to see it as a sign of weakness or something like that. Have you got any, I'm feeding into kind of negative preconceptions about people with disability. Have you got any thoughts about how you can kind of avoid that, how you can talk about pain but not have it be perceived in a negative way?
That's really difficult because I think I'm very lucky in that, like, I am quite like physically able, and I'm also in a really good place in that I've found the kind of cocktail of drugs that keeps my pain under wraps, and like I'm in the best health I've been in a while, and so I'm really proud of how much work I do, and like my career is really important to me. But I haven't always, and it's really tough. It's really tough. I think finding community is so important. Like finding people who go through the same thing as you do and understanding that you're not the only person suffering. And it really can feel like it. I think every single human being, you know, you live your own life and you feel your experience. It's hard to imagine that other people go through things that are so difficult, so traumatic. But we all do. And acknowledging that and finding community, I think, is really important. And yeah, and then when you start to build that community, it kind of makes you realize, okay, I can be really proud of these things that I've done. I can be really proud that I got up and I cleaned my apartment today, because that is a really huge step for some people. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think Dylan's absolutely right. I think, but I would say maybe you need just a pain buddy. You may need a community. It might be very helpful, but it needn't be everybody. It just need to be one person. So every day I ring my friend Nick, or he rings me, maybe twice a day. We speak more often than many married people do, or partnered people do. And we speak, and I say, "How did you sleep? How are you?" And he will say, "Oh, I had a bad night, I had a pain," or I might say, "I'm really in pain at the moment. What am I going to do?" And he is my buddy. And with him or before him, I had my friend Bill. I used to go around to see my friend Bill. He had venous ulcers on his feet. He had muscular dystrophy, and he was in a wheelchair. And so I did two things with Bill. We talked about pain, and we talked about writing, because he is a writer. He's dead now, but he was a writer, wrote lots of novels, and helped me learn how to become a writer myself. So I do think community is important, but I also think maybe for some people, just one person is important, who shares their experience. Maybe it's the experience of being British and supporting a crap football team. Maybe it's an experience of pain. Maybe it's experience of ADHD or whatever else it might be. But it's really important because it validates you, and because it also, you don't need to be public. So we were talking, I think, earlier about what other people would call, and I would call, painsomnia. So painsomnia is when you wake up in the middle of the night with pain. And so I went on Twitter, so I know, or what it was Twitter. Now I'm not on X anymore, but I'm on Blue Sky. So in the middle of the night, it's great because you can talk to lots of Australians. That's if you're British. It's fantastic, or Americans or whatever. But I learned that I don't say I have pain, because everybody says that's awful, that's terrible. And you don't want to say that. You want to say your president is crap. It's much more important. And in a way, pain, so for example, when Al was talking brilliantly, I had more pain. And one of the best things that I learned when we edited the International Perspectives on Spinal Cord Injury at WHO is there's a great paper about people whose partners are solicitors experience more pain. Because their partners are saying, "How's your pain? Is your pain okay? Are you okay today? All right, how's it?" And of course, the whole thing about pain is the more you draw attention to it, the worse it feels. Because it's not that the pain changes, it's that you become focused on the bit of your body which has pain. And so I think it is important to acknowledge pain, but it's also important to ignore pain and to pretend that it doesn't exist, even though it does. And you have to do that. So there's a famous horse which won the Derby, although it had a broken leg. So presumably it's in great pain, but it's also great excitement at winning the race. And I think, and humans in wartime or in conflict or in disasters or climbing or whatever else it might be, ignoring pain is really important. But I think one final thought, and again, it was what you said, Dylan. When we look at images of disability on the television or in our media, we always see images of powerful, strong people who are Paralympians or who are outward bounding or whatever. What about all those people who are frail? What about all those people who are in pain? What about all those people with fatigue? We don't see images of them. And I think it's really important to say they exist, and that is valid.
I'd just like to thank everyone for being part of today's discussion, particularly to Tom, Dylan and Elle. And Kirsten, do you want to do the honours here? So Kirsten Dean, Deputy at the Melbourne Disability Institute. We can't give this to you physically, Elle. But we can send something we can send it to you. So I'm sure Kirsten has your address. But I want to thank everyone for coming today. And I've learned a lot through this discussion. So I'm really glad we opened it up to discussion. I'm glad also that we talked about fatigue as well, because I think that's the next discussion. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel quite fatigued now. And so if my words go a bit funny, that's they always go funny, but they go worse at this time of the day. So thank you all for participating, and let's keep this discussion going because I think it's a really important one. Thank you.